All right, so looks like we're diving into the world of financial crises today
Yeah.
with all this stuff on manias, panics, and crashes.
Hmm.
Classic Kindleberger. We've got excerpts from the book itself,
Of
and then
course.
we've got some deep dives into some like historical examples.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, are we on the verge of another crash? I guess that's the big question.
Right.
Let's see what Kindleberger has to say about all that.
Yeah. So Kindleberger, he gives us this model,
Okay.
a framework for understanding how these financial crises,
They unfold.
yeah, how they unfold. And the thing is, you see these same patterns
Mm-hmm.
popping up again and again throughout history.
Yeah, he breaks it down into those stages, right?
Oh.
Displacement, boom, euphoria,
Oh.
distress, revulsion, and then boom, panic and crash.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you're right, it's not just some abstract theory.
No, not at all. It's like
It's like looking at the blueprints of a building.
you see how the structure works. You see where those weaknesses are.
Yeah.
Hyman Minsky, another economist, who really dug into this idea of financial instability.
Right.
He said that the system itself is basically built for fragility.
Interesting.
And Kindleberger really shows us how those cracks, they appear and then, widen over time.
Okay, so let's start with that foundation then.
Yeah.
That first stage, displacement.
Yeah.
Kindleberger says there's always some big shock, some event that just kicks things off.
Right.
He talks about things like technological revolutions, right?
Exactly. Think about the Roaring '20s
Okay.
leading up to the Great Depression.
Yeah.
All that new tech, the radio, the automobile,
Right.
it created this frenzy of investment and speculation.
Yeah.
Or fast forward to the dot-com bubble.
Okay.
Same story.
Different technology.
Different technology, exactly.
But it's not just tech, is it?
No.
Kindleberger also talks about deregulation.
Absolutely. When the rules of the game suddenly change, it can create these huge opportunities,
Sure.
but also huge risks.
Of course. Yeah.
Remember that Japan as #1 sentiment in the 1980s?
Yeah.
Everyone was looking at Japan's economic model as like the future.
Right.
And this shifted investment focus within Japan
Okay.
led to a massive surge in asset prices.
Classic bubble.
Classic bubble territory.
Okay, so we've got this initial shock, this
Yeah.
displacement, and then things start to heat up,
Mm-hmm.
and we move into the boom phase.
Right.
But what really gets the fire going?
Well,
Kindleberger says there's this psychological element at play, this
Yeah.
follow the leader mentality.
it's like everyone's looking over their shoulder,
Okay.
seeing their neighbor getting rich,
Yeah.
and they're thinking, I don't want to be left out.
Right.
Even if it means, making these risky bets
Okay.
they wouldn't normally consider.
Makes sense.
And this ties into what's known as the greater fool theory.
Wait, the greater fool theory, what's that all about?
It's the idea that people buy these overpriced assets,
Okay.
believing that they can sell them later on
To a bigger fool.
to an even bigger fool. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Kindleberger uses the 1930 Chicago real estate boom as an example.
Right.
People were buying up land at these inflated prices,
Yeah.
convinced they could just flip it for a profit.
So it's like a giant game of financial hot potato.
Exactly.
And no one wants to be left holding the bag when the music stops.
Precisely.
And, it makes you wonder,
Yeah.
are we seeing shades of that in today's market?
Right.
Are people buying into certain assets just because they think someone else will pay even more later on?
It's a question worth asking.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
But Kindleberger says it's not just about this follow the leader frenzy.
Right.
He says there's another key ingredient that really fuels the fire. Credit.
He's spot on about that.
Yeah.
It's not just the mania, it's the fuel that lets that mania burn hotter
Right.
and spread faster. Easy credit is like pouring gasoline on an already raging fire.
Right, because when borrowing is cheap and easy,
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to chase those risky bets.
Exactly.
But you said something earlier that kind of caught my attention.
Yeah.
You mentioned how the definition of easy credit,
Mm-hmm.
even the definition of money itself, changes over time.
Yeah.
Can you explain that a bit more?
Yeah. It's one of those things that seems obvious in hindsight,
Okay.
but we often miss it in the moment.
Right.
What was considered easy credit 100 years ago is completely different from what we think of today.
Sure.
Take the fortnightly clearing system in France
Okay.
back in 1882.
All right.
This system essentially gave stock speculators interest-free loans
Wow.
for up to 2 weeks,
interest-free loans for speculation. That's wild.
Yeah, it really supercharged speculation at the time.
Wow.
Or think about the development of the gold exchange standard
Okay.
before World War I.
All right.
This system, by design, expanded the international credit base, fueled a period of rapid globalization.
Right there.
Speculation.
Of course.
The point is, financial systems and the very definition of money,
Yeah.
they evolved.
They change, yeah.
These changes can have a huge impact on how these boom and bust cycles play out.
Okay, so we've got this initial shock, the displacement,
Right.
the follow the leader mentality, and then easy credit pouring fuel on the fire.
Yeah.
It all seems very localized.
Right.
But how does this mania jump borders?
That's where Kindleberger's idea of international contagion comes in.
Okay.
It's not just about economic links
Yeah.
like trade or investment flows. It's about psychology.
Okay.
The fear, the greed, the rumors,
Yeah.
they spread like a virus.
So it's like a financial pandemic.
In a way, yes.
Okay.
And what's fascinating is that Kindleberger points out how this contagion,
Yeah.
it isn't always straightforward.
Okay.
Sometimes tight money policies in one country
Right.
can actually attract funds from abroad
Oh, interesting.
because investors see it as a sign of stability.
So it's like they're running toward the fire.
Precisely.
Wow.
But other times, those same policies can repel funds,
Okay.
sparking fears of a wider crisis.
So it can go either way.
It all depends.
Yeah.
All depends on expectations.
Got it.
Remember that panic in 1907?
Oh, yeah.
For a while, it wasn't clear if the financial chaos in New York
Uh-huh.
would jump across the Atlantic
Right.
and bring down banks in Italy.
It all comes down to perception then, right? How investors interpret the signals.
It's this intricate dance between economic fundamentals, policy decisions, and, crucially, psychology.
Okay, so things are heating up. The mania is spreading.
Right.
But here's where things start to get a little shady, right?
Yeah.
Kindleberger says that these boom times, they're like magnets for fraudsters.
Booms create this environment where people are willing to suspend their disbelief,
Okay.
to ignore those nagging doubts,
Yeah.
because everyone else seems to be getting rich. That
Right.
makes it ripe for exploitation.
So we're talking more than just your typical Ponzi schemes here.
Oh, much more.
Like what?
Think about the bucket shops
Okay.
that were popular the late 19th and early 20th centuries.
All right.
These were basically illegal betting parlors disguised as brokerages.
Oh, wow.
They'd take bets from people on stock prices, but they would never actually execute the trades.
That's outrageous. They were just pocketing the money if the client guessed wrong.
You got it.
Wow.
Then you've got stories of nobles back in the day
Okay.
joining company boards just for the prestige,
Really?
to lend their name and credibility,
Right.
even if the company was shady.
So basically cashing in on their titles. Wow.
Exactly.
That's something.
And then there's this wild story Kindleberger mentions,
Yeah.
the knit vendor back in 1720.
Okay.
This guy was selling, well, nothing.
Nothing.
Literally nothing.
Wait, people were investing in a company that sold nothing.
It's a testament to the power of a good story and the persuasive power of a boom.
It's amazing.
People get so caught up in the frenzy
Yeah.
that logic goes out the window.
It's amazing and a little scary to see how these patterns repeat themselves
Yeah.
throughout history. But, okay, let's say things start to go south.
Right.
The boom turns to bust.
Right.
And panic sets in. Does anyone step in to save the day? Does Kindleberger talk about that?
He does, and this is where things get really interesting.
Okay.
He talks about the role of the lender of last resort,
Okay.
usually a central bank or a government,
Right.
stepping in to provide emergency loans and prevent a complete meltdown.
So like a financial firefighter coming in to put out the blaze.
So Kindleberger had some pretty strong opinions about this.
Oh, yeah.
He recognized the need for a lender of last resort,
Okay.
but he also saw the potential dangers.
What kind of dangers?
He was worried about what's called moral hazard.
Okay.
If investors know they'll always be bailed out,
Yeah.
won't they be more likely to take bigger risks,
Right.
knowing they won't face the full consequence?
Right. Because if you know someone will always catch you when you fall,
Yeah,
you're more likely to take a leap, right?
exactly.
Makes sense.
And it gets even more complicated when you start asking who should be the lender of last resort?
Right. Yeah.
The central bank, the treasury,
Yeah.
and who should they be saving?
Right.
Just the institutions that are fundamentally sound,
Yeah.
or everyone?
It gets political very quickly.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
And it's not just theoretical.
right.
Look at the Continental Illinois bank failure back in 1984,
Okay,
or more recently, the collapse of First Republic Bank.
right.
In both cases, the FDIC essentially removed insurance limits
Wow.
to prevent a full-blown bank run.
That's a pretty drastic move, isn't it?
It was.
Removing those limits?
It stopped the immediate panic,
Sure.
but did it really solve the underlying problems?
Right.
Or did it just kick the can down the road, setting the stage for an even bigger crisis down the line?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
And it seems like there's no easy answer.
Not really.
But let's go back to the psychology for a second.
Okay.
We all know that when things are booming, everyone thinks, this time it's different.
Right.
We're in a new era. The old rules don't apply anymore.
Mm-hmm.
What does Kindleberger say about that?
He's pretty blunt about it.
Okay.
He says that thinking this time is different is one of the most dangerous assumptions you can make in the financial world.
So he's saying we're all doomed to repeat the mistakes of the past.
Not necessarily doomed,
Okay.
but he does a great job of dissecting all those arguments
Yeah.
about why each boom is supposedly special.
Right.
And he shows how those same arguments have been used to justify every bubble in history.
Like during the dot-com bubble,
Exactly.
when everyone was convinced that internet companies would keep growing forever,
Yeah.
the Dow would just keep climbing.
People were saying, this time it's different because of the internet. Just like they said, this time it's different because of the railroad.
Right, of course.
Or this time it's different because of the automobile.
Yeah.
But the underlying patterns, the human psychology at play,
Yeah.
it all remains remarkably consistent.
So what you're saying is, even though the details might change, the song remains the same.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like we're looking at these financial markets
Yeah.
through a new lens after reading Kindleberger. Almost like he's given us this decoder ring for all the chaos.
That's the beauty of it. You start to see the signs, the patterns repeating themselves.
Yeah.
It can help you avoid getting swept up in the next crash.
Or at least avoid being the greater fool
Right.
when the music stops, right?
Exactly.
But this isn't just about protecting ourselves, is it?
No, not at all.
These booms and busts,
Yeah.
they have a real impact on people's lives.
Absolutely.
On whole economies even.
You're absolutely right. It's easy to get caught up in the abstract theories.
Right.
But we have to remember that real people get hurt when these bubbles burst.
And Kindleberger doesn't shy away from showing us that human side.
Of these events.
Does he? You've got some fascinating examples in this stack of readings here.
Oh, yeah.
From the Tulip Mania
Yeah.
in 17th century Holland
Mm-hmm.
to the Japanese real estate bubble of the 1980s.
Those are classics for a reason.
Yeah. The Tulip Mania, it's like the poster child for speculative bubbles.
It is.
I mean, people were creating tulip bulbs for houses for entire estates.
Crazy, right?
It sounds insane.
It's like, what were they thinking?
Yeah, what was they thinking?
Well, that's the thing about bubbles.
Yeah.
Logic and reason tend to go out the window.
Right.
At the peak of the mania, a single tulip bulb
Yeah.
could trade for more than 10 times the annual salary
Oh, wow.
of a skilled craftsman.
Wow, that's just
It's mind-boggling.
mind-boggling, yeah.
And then, what, the bottom fell out?
It did.
And when it did?
Yeah. And when it did, a lot of people were financially ruined. It's a stark reminder that these speculative frenzies can have devastating consequences.
All right, so Tulip Mania, check. Okay.
Yeah.
What about Japan? You mentioned earlier they were riding high in the 80s.
Right.
That whole Japan is #1 thing?
Yeah. Japan was seen as this unstoppable economic force,
Mm-hmm.
and all that optimism fueled a massive bubble
Okay.
in real estate and stocks.
Driven by easy credit, I'm guessing?
Of course.
Right.
Japanese banks were practically throwing money at people.
Wow.
Property prices went through the roof.
Yeah.
At one point, people estimated that the land under the Imperial Palace in Tokyo
Seriously?
was worth more than all the real estate in California.
It's just, oh, wow.
Yeah,
But then, just like the tulip bubble, it all came crashing down, right?
it did.
Okay.
The Nikkei, Japan's main stock index,
Yeah.
peaked at nearly 40,000 points in 1989.
Within a few years,
Yeah.
it had lost over 60% of its value.
And what about those banks that were so eager to lend all that money?
They ended up holding a mountain of bad debt.
Right.
Some had to be bailed out by the government.
Of course.
The Japanese economy went through what's known as the lost decade
Okay.
as it struggled to recover.
It really drives home Kindleberger's point, doesn't it?
It does.
These booms and busts, they're not just abstract theories.
Well,
they have a real impact on people, on businesses, on entire countries.
Absolutely. And the thing is, we see these patterns repeating themselves in different times and places. The specifics might change. The asset at the center of the bubble might be different. But the underlying dynamics are often eerily similar.
So what you're saying is we need to be aware of those underlying dynamics, those patterns,
Exactly.
We need to be asking ourselves those tough questions Kindleberger lays out, like where's the easy credit flowing? What's the displacement that's driving this boom? Is everyone just blindly following the leader?
Those are the key questions.
And most importantly,
we
need to be skeptical when we hear that familiar refrain. This time, it's different.
Because history tells us it rarely is.
Because history tells us it rarely is. Okay. All right, let's shift gears a bit. We've talked about easy credit being the fuel for these bubbles. You mentioned earlier how the definition of money itself is constantly changing.
It is.
Did we dig into that a bit more?
You bet.
Okay.
One of Kindleberger's key insights is that financial innovation, while often beneficial, can also create new avenues for speculation and excess. New financial instruments and practices emerge. And sometimes they get ahead of our ability to understand and manage the risks.
It's like we're building these incredibly complex financial machines. But we're not always sure how all the gears and levers work.
That's a great analogy. And sometimes those machines spin out of control. Think about the development of credit cards or online payment systems. Or even cryptocurrencies. These innovations have revolutionized how we think about and use money, but they've also made it easier to borrow, to spend, to speculate.
And when that happens on a large scale, it can create the conditions for a bubble. It's like we're constantly pouring more fuel on the fire.
Exactly. And it's not always easy to see the risks until it's too late. Look at the subprime mortgage crisis in the U.S. Back in the mid-2000s.
People were getting mortgages they couldn't really afford. And those mortgages were being bundled up and sold off as these complex investments.
It was a perfect storm of financial innovation, easy credit, and lax regulation. And when the housing market turned, the whole system came crashing down.
Okay, so we've got financial innovation, easy credit. And then there's that psychological element we talked about earlier. The mania that seems to take hold during these booms.
That's a crucial piece of the puzzle. Kindleberger talks about how these booms can create a kind of collective delusion, a suspension of disbelief. People see others getting rich. They don't want to be left out. And they start making decisions they wouldn't normally make.
It's like that fear of missing out. That FOMO everyone talks about.
And that fear can lead people to invest in things they don't understand, to take on more risk than they can handle. They might even start justifying their decisions with flimsy logic. Telling themselves, this time it's different. Even when all the warning signs are flashing red.
And as we've seen, that can lead to some pretty disastrous outcomes.
It can.
But, it's not just individual investors who get caught up in the frenzy, right? Even sophisticated financial institutions, the supposed experts, can fall prey to these psychological traps.
Absolutely.
Is there an example that comes to mind?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The collapse of long-term capital management.
Okay.
Or LTCM.
All right.
Back in 1998.
Okay.
Is a great example.
Okay.
This was a hedge fund.
All right.
Run by some of the brightest minds on Wall Street.
Wow.
Including Nobel laureates in economics.
You're not your average day traders.
Not at all.
Right.
They were using incredibly complex mathematical models.
Wow.
To make bets on the market.
Okay.
And for a while, they were incredibly successful. Then they made a series of bets that went bad. And their losses started to spiral out of control.
And because they were so big and so interconnected with the rest of the financial system, they had to be bailed out by the Federal Reserve.
It was a stark reminder that even the smartest people can get caught up in the mania. And that even the most sophisticated financial models can't always predict the future.
So we've got these bubbles fueled by easy credit driven by psychology, sometimes even amplified by outright fraud.
Absolutely.
And then inevitably they burst.
And when they do, the consequences can be severe.
We've seen it time and again throughout history, haven't we?
We have.
The Great Depression, the Asian financial crisis,
yeah,
the dot-com bubble,
right,
the subprime mortgage crisis.
And the list goes on.
And the list goes on, yeah.
Each crisis has its own unique features.
Sure.
But there are often these common threads running through them.
Right.
And Kindleberger's model helps us to see those threads.
Yeah, it's like he's given us a map to navigate this complex terrain.
That's a great way to put it.
So we can use that map to try and avoid those pitfalls.
Yeah.
Exactly. Or at least be better prepared when the next crisis hits. Absolutely. But what are some of the key takeaways from Kindleberger's work? What are the practical lessons we can apply to our own lives?
Well, first and foremost, we need to be aware of the patterns.
Okay.
We need to understand how these crises unfold.
Right.
Be able to recognize the warning signs.
Like what? What should we be looking for?
Excessive speculation, easy credit.
Right.
And that dangerous, this time it's different mentality.
Oh, yeah.
Those are all big red flags.
So we need to be skeptical.
Yes.
Especially when everyone around us seems to be getting rich quick.
Exactly. And we need to be mindful of the role of financial innovation.
Okay.
While innovation can be a good thing,
sure,
it can also create new avenues for excessive speculation.
So it's not about rejecting new ideas or technology.
Yeah.
It's about understanding the risks they might introduce.
Exactly. And we need to think about how we regulate these new financial instruments and practices.
Right.
How do we find that balance?
Yeah.
Between encouraging innovation and protecting the financial system from excessive risk-taking.
That's a tough one.
It is.
It's like walking a tightrope.
It is.
But what about the role of the lender of last resort?
Right.
We talked earlier about how Kindleberger had some reservations about that.
You did.
Yeah.
And it's a complex issue.
Yeah.
The lender of last resort can help prevent a crisis from spiraling out of control.
Sure.
But it can also create moral hazard.
It's like that old saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day.
Right.
Teach a man to fish and you feed them for a lifetime.
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
But if you keep bailing someone out every time they make a bad fishing decision,
right,
are they ever going to learn?
That's the dilemma, and there's no easy answer.
Right. Yeah.
But we need to be aware of the trade-offs involved.
So it sounds like the key takeaways here are vigilance, skepticism, and careful consideration of the risks.
I think that's a great way to sum it up.
Yeah.
And these aren't just lessons for policymakers.
Right.
Or financial professionals.
Yeah.
These are lessons for all of us.
Because ultimately, we're all affected by these booms and busts. Yeah. These cycles of financial history.
We are. So the next time you hear someone saying, this time it's different.
Right.
Remember the lessons of history.
Remember the lessons of history.
Remember Kindleberger.
Remember Kindleberger.
Yeah.
I got it. You know, speaking of remembering Kindleberger, you've got some pretty interesting notes here about his views on swindles and fraud.
Oh, yeah.
He seemed to have a lot to say about that.
He did. He called swindlers the termites.
Okay.
That can undermine even the strongest economic foundations.
Wow. That's pretty vivid imagery.
It is.
Termites.
And he argued that swindles are more prevalent during booms.
Why is that?
Well,
do booms somehow attract fraudsters?
Well, booms create this environment where people are willing to suspend their disbelief.
Okay.
To ignore those nagging doubts.
Yeah.
Because everyone else seems to be getting rich.
Right, so there's more money flowing around.
There's more money flowing around.
People are more willing to take risks.
People are more willing to take risks.
And there's often a sense of euphoria.
Absolutely.
That can make people more susceptible to scams.
So it's like a breeding ground for bad actors.
Yeah.
They see an opportunity.
Yeah.
They pounce.
And Kindleberger pointed out that booms often lead to a decline in ethical standards.
They do.
Interesting. People get so caught up in the pursuit of wealth that they might be more willing to cut corners or look the other way when it comes to unethical behavior.
It's like that old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
But in this case, it's absolute greed that corrupts.
Absolute greed corrupts, yeah. And that decline in ethical standards, that willingness to turn a blind eye, it can create a breeding ground for fraud.
Absolutely.
And we've seen this throughout history, haven't we?
We have.
From the South Sea Bubble
back
in 18th century England to the Enron scandal in the early 2000s.
Those are just two examples of how fraud can thrive during these periods of financial mania.
So what are some of the red flags we should be looking for?
Yeah.
How can we protect ourselves from being swindled?
Well, first of all, be wary of any investment that promises unusually high returns.
If it sounds too good to be true,
right,
it probably is.
It probably is.
That's a classic rule of thumb, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And be especially skeptical of investments that are complex and difficult to understand.
Because complexity can be a way for fraudsters to hide their schemes.
Right. So it's also important to do your research.
It is.
Right.
Yeah.
Don't just take someone's word for it.
Right.
Look into the company or individual offering the investment. Check their track record. See if there have been any complaints filed against them.
Exactly.
And if you're still not sure, it's always a good idea.
It is.
To get a second opinion from a trusted financial advisor.
Absolutely.
Someone who's not involved in the investment.
Right.
And can give you an objective assessment.
Exactly. And finally, remember that fraud can happen to anyone.
Right.
Even sophisticated investors can be fooled.
So it's not about being naive or gullible.
No.
It's about being aware of the risks and taking steps to protect yourself.
That's right. So don't be afraid to ask questions.
Yeah.
And don't be embarrassed to walk away if something doesn't feel right.
It's better to be safe than sorry.
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to your finances.
Couldn't agree more.
Right. You know, it's easy to get caught up in all the doom and gloom when we talk about Kindleberger and financial crises.
Right.
But his work isn't just about crashes and panics.
It's not. Exactly.
Right. It's not all doom and gloom. Right.
He's not just telling us to run for the hills and hide all our money under the mattress.
Exactly. He also provides valuable insights into how we can create a more stable and resilient financial system.
So what are some of his recommendations?
Well,
how do we build a system that can withstand those inevitable shocks and avoid those catastrophic meltdowns?
Well, he emphasizes the importance of sound regulation. Regulations that can help prevent excessive risk-taking and protect investors from fraud.
So it's not about stifling innovation or limiting economic freedom?
No. Not at all.
Right. It's about setting some ground rules, some guardrails to ensure that everyone plays fair. And that the system as a whole is more stable.
Exactly. He also stresses the need for international cooperation.
Which makes sense, right?
Yeah.
Because in today's globalized world, financial crises can quickly spread across borders.
Right. So we need to work together to create a more stable global financial system.
One where a crisis in one country doesn't automatically trigger a domino effect around the world.
And what about the role of central banks?
Yeah.
They seem to be caught in this tricky balancing act.
I do.
Between stimulating growth and keeping a lid on inflation.
Right.
Where do they fit into all of this?
Kindleberger believed that central banks have a crucial role to play in stabilizing the financial system.
So they're like the referees of the game.
In a way, yeah.
Trying to make sure everyone plays by the rules.
But they also need to be able to act as a lender of last resort when necessary.
Right.
To provide that emergency liquidity when the system is in danger of freezing up.
But at the same time, they need to be careful not to create moral hazard by bailing everyone out indiscriminately.
Exactly.
It's a tough job.
It is. It's a delicate balancing act.
Yeah.
But it's essential for maintaining financial stability.
So it's not just about avoiding crashes. It's about creating a system that's more resilient to those inevitable shocks.
Right. A system that can withstand the ups and downs of the economic cycle without experiencing those catastrophic meltdowns.
And that requires a combination of factors, right?
It does.
Sound regulation.
Yeah.
International cooperation. Responsible central banking.
Yes.
And informed investors who are aware of the risks involved.
I think you've hit the nail on the head.
Okay.
And I think that's one of the key takeaways from Kindleberger's work.
Yeah.
It's not just about understanding how crises happen.
Right.
It's also about understanding what we can do to prevent them.
Right.
Or at least mitigate their impact.
Right. It's about being proactive.
Absolutely.
About taking steps to build a more stable and sustainable financial system.
Exactly. Because ultimately, the goal is to create a financial system that serves the needs of the real economy.
Right.
A system that promotes economic growth and stability.
And that requires a long-term perspective.
It does.
Right. We need to be thinking about not just the next quarter,
Right.
or the next year, but about the next decade and beyond.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
And that's something that Kindleberger really emphasized.
Okay.
He argued that we need to take a long-term perspective when it comes to financial markets.
Because short-termism, that focus on immediate gains, it can lead to excessive risk-taking and ultimately to instability.
Exactly. He also stressed the importance of learning from history.
Because, as we've seen, these patterns of booms and busts, they have a way of repeating themselves.
They do. And if we don't learn from the mistakes of the past, we're doomed to repeat them.
So let's keep those lessons in mind as we navigate the complexities of the financial world.
And let's remember that Kindleberger's work isn't just a dry academic treatise.
Okay.
It's a guidebook for understanding and managing risk in a world that's increasingly interconnected.
Right. It's a book that everyone, from policymakers to investors to everyday citizens, should read and understand. Yeah, it really is a powerful reminder.
It is.
That financial history isn't just a bunch of dates and events in a textbook.
No.
It's got this ripple effect that shapes our lives today, and it holds these clues to what might be coming next.
Precisely. It's a living subject, constantly evolving, but with these underlying patterns that we can learn from.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
We've unpacked Kindleberger's model, looked at some crazy examples from history. Let's bring it all home.
Okay.
What does all this mean for you listening right now?
Well, you've got knowledge now.
Okay.
You understand the patterns, the psychology, the role of credit, and innovation.
Yep.
The dangers of getting caught up in the hype.
Sure.
That's powerful stuff.
It's like you've given our listener a toolkit to navigate the financial world, to avoid those potholes, and maybe even spot some opportunities others might miss.
Exactly, but like any tool.
Yeah.
It's only useful if you know how to use it.
Okay. So let's get practical.
All right.
What are some specific actions you can take based on everything we've discussed?
First and foremost, stay skeptical.
Okay.
Don't buy into the hype. When you hear that siren song of "this time it's different."
Yeah.
Remember all those other times it was sung?
And how it usually ended in a chorus of regret.
Right.
Ouch.
Second, keep an eye on credit.
Okay.
When it's flowing freely, it can create those conditions for bubbles.
Right.
Be mindful of your own borrowing.
Sure.
And watch those broader trends in the economy.
Don't get swept up in the easy money current.
Exactly. Third, remember those psychological factors we talked about?
Okay.
The fear of missing out, the follow the leader impulse.
Yeah.
They can lead us down some risky paths.
Be honest with yourself about your own risk tolerance.
Right.
Don't let those emotions drive your decisions.
Absolutely. And fourth, never underestimate the power of research.
Right.
Don't invest in things you don't understand.
Right.
If something seems too good to be true.
Yeah.
Or if you're being pressured, step back.
It's better to walk away from a questionable deal
It is.
than to lose your shirt chasing a quick buck.
Couldn't agree more.
Okay, one last thought
All right.
before we wrap things up.
Yeah.
We've been looking back at history, at all these booms and busts.
Right.
But let's turn our attention to the present for a moment.
Okay.
What's happening right now that could be setting the stage for the next crisis?
The $1 million question. Kindleberger would remind us, the present is always prologue.
Yeah.
What are the displacements of our time?
Yeah, what are?
Where are those potential bubbles forming?
And what new innovations are changing the financial landscape?
Exactly.
For better or for worse?
For better or for worse, yeah.
And how can you use this knowledge, this new perspective, to protect yourself and make the best decisions for your future?
These are the questions to ponder.
Yeah, you've got the tools now.
You do.
Keep learning.
Keep learning.
Stay curious.
Stay curious.
And remember, history might not repeat itself exactly,
right,
but it often rhymes.
It does.
And knowing the tune can make all the difference.
Well said.
And hey, if you're ready to dive into another fascinating topic,
yeah,
you know.
Did you get any of that?